Hello, my name is Duncan Frost. I'm going to take you through getting started with OpenRCT2. I'm one of the developers on OpenRCT2 and I've been with the project since basically the beginning. So whenever you have any sort of questions, feel free to get in contact with me and I'll hopefully put you on the way forward on helping to contribute to the project. So we have a very extensive README, which takes you through pretty much all of the steps for getting ready. If you've never used GitHub before, it can be a bit daunting to begin with, but once you've got an account, you can just go to our OpenRCT2 folder page, and you would fork the project by clicking the fork button. I've already done this before, so you can see I've already got a fork of the project, and then we're now on your fork of the project, and we can just go to code and we can copy the URL of this. So now we need to download our folder. I've previously downloaded it. I'm just going to delete that so we can start fresh for you. So I've got a folder here which is completely empty, and we're just going to clone the repo from the internet. So it's just git clone and then the URL that we copied from here. And we're going to hit enter. It's going to start cloning. So that's downloading all the source code onto our computer. The next step after we've downloaded all the source code would be obviously to build the project. To be able to build, you need Visual Studio 2019 and you need the desktop development with C++. So Visual Studio install, I'll just show you what that looks like. I'm not going to uninstall my Visual Studio just for demonstration purposes because it would just take far too long. But you can see in this, when you go through the install process, you'll see a prompt which comes up which says what components you want, and you just want the desktop development with C++. And that will install all of the individual components that you need to be able to build the game. We used to require the Windows 10 SDK as an additional component, but you don't need that anymore, I believe. So that's all you need, not too much. And then once you've finished downloading the whole project, you can build it. So let's just go through the README that we've done or are doing this step. We've checked out the repository and we've started downloading it. I'm using the Git command line interface. Some people prefer to use the GitHub desktop tools. And I believe I've got some graphical user interface and such. I've got used to using the command line interface now. I'm not really going to change. So now we've finished downloading all the files. I can see we've got this new folder, OpenRCT2, and inside here we've got all of our individual files of the source code. So we can close this window, and now we can get on to the next step, which is building it. So we need to open a developer command prompt. It's just like a normal command window, except it's got a couple of additional tools in the path so you can build from it. Then you need to change directory to our OpenRCT2 folder. Easy way of doing that, hold down shift, right click, then you'll see copy as path. And you can just do change directory. You can right click to paste, and that'll change directly to here. And then we just need to do exactly as per the README, msbuild openrct2.proj/t build x64. So the reason we have to go through this MS build step rather than using Visual Studio directly is that it does a bunch of additional things for the first time, which is such as downloading all of our dependencies and all of our third-party libraries and gets them set up correctly. You only need to do this maybe every now and then whenever we update our third-party libraries. So it's pretty rare that you have to bust out the develop command prompt to build the game. But that's it now downloaded the third-party libraries, and it's actually started compiling each individual source files. After it's finished compiling all of the individual files, it will move on to downloading our other parts of the project, such as the object files, and well, you can sort of see all of the other individual parts if we go back to OpenRCT2. These are our sub repositories, this dependencies. These are our replays. They make sure that everything works correctly. We've got localization for all of the translations. These are our objects that get downloaded. So that's what it's going to do after it's done all this, and then it's going to use the built object to compile in all of the individual sprites that we've added to the game, such as for the new roller coaster, the RMC coaster. It has to build a sprite file, g2.dat. If you ever hear me say, well, you've made a mistake, your g2.dat is out of date, that just means you need to run msbuild OpenRCT2 proj tbuild, and that'll recompile it and get your g2.dat file downloaded. Whilst this is compiling, we can open it up in Visual Studio as well. So if we go into our OpenRCT2 folder and we open up the solution file, then Visual Studio will open up. Unfortunately, my system is quite an old system, so it takes quite a while to compile. I'm sure for any of you it will be already downloaded by now and compiled. So we've got sort of split into two main parts, which is source and test. Test for obviously all of our tests, and source for the actual main logic of the game. Split into sub-projects, libopenrct2, libopenrct2 UI, and CLI and Win. The main game logic is in libopenrct2, and libopenrct2 UI is obviously the user interface, which tends to be where most new developers will be working. So let's open up these folders. You can see all of our subfolders here. If you don't have this view, it might be because you don't have show all files ticked. If you don't have that ticked, then it can look like this, with every file just alphabetically. Very hard to navigate, so make sure you got show all files enabled for the project. As I said, libopenrct2 is, oh sorry, didn't mean to click that. It's probably going to be where you're working. So I'll just take you through that. Audio, pretty self-explanatory. Same with drawing and input, they're all pretty self-explanatory. Interface, this is sort of how it works, the windows and all of its individual components of the window. Scripting, that's for the plugins, which we now have for the JavaScript code which you can run with the game, and then title for the title screen. The windows, this is where each individual window in the game has its own individual file. This is all of the logic for how those windows will work. So if you ever wanted to know, for example, the guest window, how something in that worked, well, there's guest.cvp, which you can open up, and there'll be all of the individual parts of that are in there. Let's just see how the compiling is coming on. It's still going strong, so I'll keep discussing the rest of the project. So that's libopenrct2 UI. Let's move now onto these other two projects here, CLI and Win. This is where the actual executable that you'd run is made. We've got is a bit of a hack. The reason why we have these two, it's so it makes a command prompt window pop up when you run it in the developing mode. That's the reason why we have two of them. I'm sure someone else in the team will correct me and say it's for a different reason, but that was my understanding. I don't really have to ever deal with anything like this, and I doubt you would ever need to deal with any of this. So you can pretty much never need to look at these two parts of the repository. The main meat of the project though is in libopenRCT2. So we've got actions. This is for any sort of modification of the game state which needs to go over the network. That's split into different actions such as placing a footpath, lowering the land, raising the land. Those are all different actions. We've also got, I think these are pretty self-explanatory, audio and command line, for obviously handling audio and command line. Config, if you're ever wanting to add a new option to the options window and you want it to be saved, that gets saved into the config. So that's where you would need to make your modification. You would go into config.h and make the required modification. Core is for all our library functions which aren't part of the C++ standard, but we use them quite extensively throughout the game. Drawing, this is your sort of your low-level drawing, hands it off to the OpenGL and the software rendering system. Interface, again, this is to do with the user interface in general, and a few other sort of extra things, such as screenshots and that sort of thing. Localization, if you're ever wanting to add a new feature which has some new text, then you would have to go into localization, string IDs. Every single string in the game has a corresponding ID, and then you can use that ID to look up the different translations. So we can see someone added this string follow subject tip ID number 6458, and if we were to open up our if we opened up data, languages, NGB, if we open that with them, and we went to 6458, you can see that that string would display as follow this on the main view when you're in English, and then if you were to, I don't know, let's see the French translation, 6458, it would show the French equivalent in the window. If a translation is not available, it will always fall back to the NGB. And if you're adding a new feature, you only ever add it to NGB, and you leave the other translations to the localization repository, and they'll take care of adding that. So that's localization. Let's have another check to see how the compiling is going. Still not complete just yet. We've next got management, which is where your awards, finances, marketing, you can read as well as I can. In general, new developers probably won't be touching anything in here. I don't think I've touched anything in there for quite some time. Network, again, pretty self-explanatory. It's low-level network communications for multiplayer. I wouldn't expect any new developers to be touching that. Object. Every single .dat file or .park object is an object, and there's a corresponding file for how it's loaded and how it works. So, for example, banners. We've got here read legacy. In terms of objects, the legacy is the SV6 for .dat file. So that's what read legacy is. There's also read JSON, which is our park object file. It should be pretty similar and pretty self-explanatory how it reads the two different versions and ends up producing a working object which can be used from either. That's the object folder. Then we've got paint. So every single entity and tile element in the game has to be painted onto the screen back to front, so that the furthest away object gets painted first and then the closest object gets painted last. And this ensures that things get painted on top of each other correctly. So this is called a plot list, and so when you paint in this program, in OpenRCT2, what we mean is add things to the plot list and then reorganize the plot list. So that's what these paint files mean. It's how an entity gets broken up into its components and added to the plot list. So you can see here it's adding the base image of the peep, chucking it onto the plot list. I wonder if it's now finished compiling, so we should be able to run it now. So let's run it from inside Visual Studio. When you boot up Visual Studio for the first time, this project always likes to default to the x86 version, so just remember to switch it to x64, otherwise well, you end up compiling it twice and it's an absolute pain. So that's it starting to run. It'll take a little while to load up the first time because it needs to build a couple of little items first. It's gone quite quickly for me because this is actually the, I think, 5th time trying to do this video, and I kept messing up the video. So it's already built a lot of things already. You'll find that the debug builds of the game are very poor performance. You can see right now I'm getting about 5 frames per second, which incidentally is about the frame rate which I'm recording this at. So, and this is how I normally interact with the game at this sort of low frame rate. You can see here these vehicles, these are called entities in the game. That's what we call entities, and the track is a tile element. These trees are tile elements. So whenever you see entity or tile element, that's what they mean. You'll also see this one's actually called sprite. This is the old name which we used to have for entities, but we decided it was a bit ambiguous, so we tried to rename it. If someone wants to make a pull request changing that folder name to entity, that would be great. It's just a lot of things we just haven't got around to doing. That's why we always need new developers to come join. All of the guest and staff logic, that's in here. Platform, this is for anything for platform dependent, such as for Linux or Windows or Android or Mac. That will go in here. And this means that you don't have lots of platform code going out throughout the rest of the code base. RCT1, RCT2, and RCT12. This is all of our import and export code for loading RCT1 files and such as TD4 track designs or the TD6 track designs. That's where all this code is located. Ride, that's all the logic for the rides, all the logic for the vehicles, all the drawing logic for vehicles, that's all located in ride. Scenario, the objectives for scenarios, that's located in here, and the scenario repository. I haven't really touched much in scenarios, so I don't know too much about it. Scripting, that's again the plugins and how it hooks into the game and how it modifies, say for example, entities. That's all in scripting. Title, again, this for title screen. UI, yeah, it's part of the UI project and how it talks to each other. Util, this is another sort of collection of useful libraries which we use. Some of this will be moving about pretty soon into our libsawyer sister project, which will be part of the. We've also got OpenLoco, which is the same as OpenRCT2, but for Chris Sawyer's locomotion. and we share a lot of code between the two. So we're making libsawyer for the shared code. So that's where all this shared code will probably end up. Like Windows is again a little interop, and then we've got world, which is sort of a dump of anything else which doesn't really fit in any other folder. We should really sort of split this up into more folders. Always welcome to make a pull request, making some of this a bit more logical. If you don't think it's logical, then probably a lot of other people don't think it's logical. So that's the general structure of the project. So I hope that's given you a quick overview and giving you enough information to be able to get started on the project and get it compiling for your first time. After you've used developer prompt once, you pretty much don't need to use it again for another month or two, and you can just do everything from inside Visual Studio, make modifications to the file, and then you can just hit local Windows debugger and it will start compiling, and then eventually you can see it's compiled to a file, and it will start debugging the file. So I hope this has given you a good sort of introduction on how to get started on this, and I hope you start making some contribution to the project. I'm gonna make another video after this, which will hopefully show you how to do an issue and submit a pull request. And well, thanks for listening. So see ya.